What up? What up? My bad. I'm sending out all the post notifications right now. What's going down? All right, just gotta do this last one on Instagram. And we lit, and I'll put the live chat back up so that I can see everybody. See who's all up in here. Live chat. What's up? We got Brian. What up, David? JW Nugget. What's going down? What up, Adam? What's good with the family, bitch? You dig what I'm saying? I had to go ahead and send out all the notifications. Y'all know how it go. Y'all know how it go. All right. I think we all lit now. I think we all litty. Man, it feels so weird. What up, Ally? So yes, I am back officially from Jamaica. You know what I'm saying? Officially married and all that good jazz. You dig what I'm saying? That looks so weird. I just took a drink of my green cup and it disappeared. I saw that on the screen. What up, Destiny? Yeah, man, it's been a lot. It's been a little while. It's been shit like 10 days since we been live or have done anything of the sort. Only because we just haven't been able to. Hold up, that's so weird. Why is my? That's so odd. Hold on, let me change the. Hold on, why is this so dim? Aha! The plug is not plugged in all the way. It's almost time for a new light. That's what it is. The little USB is not doing its thing. All right, well, that's as bright as it's gonna get for right now. It's not digging it. It's not liking that shit. It's so weird. I can see this little corner. I think it's this side. That's just like really weird and like has a weird shadow. I don't know why. I don't like it though. Hold on, I'm gonna get that. Yeah, it is right over here. That's so odd. Why is it doing that? There we go. I think I fixed it. All right. It's not that big of a deal. Let me go ahead and just jump into this. Let's go ahead and give a shout out to all the members, though, of the channel. Shout out to all the members that kept rocking with your boy, even after we weren't able to upload. So I broke my phone while I was in Vegas, or not in Vegas, in Jamaica. So that caused a little bit of a issue with uploading and everything else as well. And then the service in Jamaica is really spotty and not very great, like at all. So yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of any sort of actual editing and uploading that I was going to actually be able to do while in Jamaica anyway, because the internet was so shit. So yeah, here we are. Anyways, let's give a shout out to all the members, man. Mr. Pay It Forward, Sam Glover, Christy Poe, Keith, Trey 420, Holla Boy, Manly, Epic, Misty Summers, Jamal, Funny Farm, Driver Thoughts, Ryan Parks, Kara, Mr. Our Happy Chick, Mr. Pay It Forward. That's the one. Oh, no, it's at the top. We already said that at the top. Happy Chick, Holla Girl, Taylor, Marla, Diesel, Nick, Caribbean Insane, Nicole, Aaron, Mama Dukes, Robin Lynn, Amy Jane Doe, Liz Nugget, My Hood Life, and Gary Willis. And there is one that I know we're missing off the top of my head. No. There's somebody. There's 2 or 3 that are missing. And one of them is going to be Carrie, because I remember saying Kara and Carrie, and there's not a Carrie anymore. So shout out to Carrie. And that's the only one off the top of my head. Like, I'm trying to remember, like, when I would say the names, how they would come out. There's definitely 3 missing, though. So Carrie and 2 other people that I can't remember off the top of my head. But shout out to the members that aren't with us no more, because I'm sure as soon as they see this live and everything else, you know, they'll probably be like, my dog is back. And, you know, so shout out to y'all. If y'all want to get a big shout out by me personally, think about hitting that dang, you know, subscribe button, that join button, all that good stuff. Well, the join button's how you get the personal shout out. Yeah, there's 3 different options to choose from. If not, just do it the free 99 way and subscribe and hit the bell notification and make sure that you just stay tuned for all the content that your boy be dropping. You dig? So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into this, man. Let's get into this MrBallen banger. This first one we got is called "He Should Have Never Left His Cabin." Yeah, I mean that's pretty straightforward. You should have never left the cabin. I don't know why, but you should have stayed your ass in the cabin.
Today's video is brought to you by Simply Safe. In 2016, 4 friends rented a small rustic cabin near a forest in a little village in Russia. Their plan was to spend the night in this cabin, and then early the next morning, they would get up and they would hike this trail that would bring them to the summit of a nearby mountain. So on March 27th, the friends got in their car, they made their way to this little village, they found their cabin, they went inside, they hung out for a bit, and then by 2 a.m., they had gone to sleep. Little did they know, outside of their cabin in the forest, lurking in the darkness, something was watching their cabin's front door, waiting for one of them to come outside. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button hands you their phone and tells you to please take this once-in-a-lifetime photo of them, agree to do it, but leave your finger over their lens. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, so let's get into today's story.
The 1 to 2 uploads anymore. You must just be like, all right, we're just gonna do one. For show 1, you get more than that, it's just a bonus. We ain't making no more fucking promises. Siberian cabin.
When most people picture Russia in their minds, they picture European Russia, which is literally the part of Russia on the western side that sits in Europe and is by far the most populated part of the country. Yeah, but European Russia only accounts for 23% of the total territory that is Russia.
The rest of it's
the other 77% is to the east of European Russia. It starts at the Ural mountain range and it extends all the way over 5 million square miles to the Pacific Ocean. And this vast, mostly forested expanse, which is 50 times bigger than the entire United Kingdom, is called Siberia. And Siberia is absolutely brutal. In Siberia, it is almost always freezing cold. Literally, the average annual temperature across all of Siberia is 32.9 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is 0.9 degrees above freezing on average every single day. In addition to the extremely deadly weather that exists basically year-round in Siberia, Siberia is also home to a bunch of huge deadly animals, such as the brown bear, which is the same as the infamous grizzly bear in North America, the gray wolf, which by size alone makes virtually all other wolves look like little puppies. Gray wolves can grow to be nearly 200 pounds. And of course, there is the highly intelligent Siberian tiger, who is perhaps one of the only predators on Earth that is known to seek out and kill people for revenge. For example, in 19...
Bruh, what? This motherfucker just say the Siberian tiger will hunt people like that. They hold grudges? These are real life Mufasas and shit up in this bitch. I know Mufasa was a fucking lion. I'm just saying, but we got real life motherfucking grudge holding ass motherfucking tigers up in this month. Like, wait, what?
1997, a hunter named Vladimir Markov was walking through a Siberian forest when he came face to face with one of these Siberian tigers, and he ended up shooting the tiger before fleeing, except the tiger didn't die. Instead, it got up and secretly followed Vladimir all the way back to his cabin, and then this tiger camped out outside of the cabin until Vladimir came out again, and the tiger pounced, killed him, and ate him. And so, unsurprisingly, Siberia has an absolutely minuscule population relative to its massive size. However, there are some adventurous people out there who are drawn to Siberia for the same reasons that most other people avoid it. These adventurous people see Siberia as one of the last truly wild places on our planet, and they want to experience it for themselves. And one of these highly adventurous people was a young man named Colin Madsen. Colin, who came from a very successful American family, was a big outdoors enthusiast who at some point in his youth began researching Siberia because he fell in love with its rugged natural beauty. He quickly began researching not only Siberia, but Siberian culture and Russian culture, and also at some point he became fluent in the Russian language. Then, in 2013, when Colin was 22 years old, he left his home in Missouri and moved to Siberia. He settled in one of Siberia's few population centers, a city called Irkutsk, which is located in the southeast of Siberia and right along the edge of Lake Baikal, which is the world's deepest freshwater lake. Colin's Siberia plan was twofold. He would go to school while he was there, and he would go out and explore. And at first, his plan went perfectly. He was accepted into Moscow State Linguistic University in Irkutsk, and very quickly he made friends who were eager to accompany him on his adventures out into the Siberian wilderness. From his arrival in Siberia in 2013 to 2016, Colin did well in his studies, and he spent countless hours exploring the forests and mountainous areas all around Lake Baikal and right outside of Irkutsk. In fact, Colin became so familiar with this region that he began volunteering with a nonprofit in the area that went around marking new trails, which meant Colin was literally venturing into the wilds of Siberia and just marking the trail as he went. So when Colin's family heard about what happened to him in 2016, they could not believe it. In March of 2016, Colin and 3 of his good hiking friends, one was American and 2 were Russian, decided they wanted to go on a hike together. They settled on hiking to the summit of Love Peak, which was a mountain located a few hours away from Irkutsk in a small village called Arshan. This hike was nothing compared to the gnarly Siberian wilderness hikes all 4 of these guys had been on before. The trail that led up to Love Peak, it was fairly steep, but it was incredibly well marked, and all 4 of these guys had hiked it several times before. However, because Colin and his friends were so experienced at hiking in Siberia, they knew that even the easiest hikes needed to be respected, because Siberia was still Siberia. There were dangers that lurked everywhere. And so the men called ahead to the village of Arshan, and they rented one of these small rustic cabins that's in the village that sits right at the base of Love Peak, and it's kind of tucked away in this forest. And so this cabin would serve as their sort of base camp and would allow them to arrive in our...
You know what? You want to know what I think happens? The fact that he made a point to, like, if you think about all the animals, we pointed out the bear and how dangerous the bear was, but he never gave any, like, backstory or any stories to bears in the area and any, like, you know, human attacks. We talked about the gray wolf and how big these motherfuckers were, but we didn't talk about any sort of attacks on humans. You know, he even showed a picture of a gray wolf next to a husky, dog. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, but then we get to the Siberian tiger. Did they run into a Siberian tiger? And since we now know that these motherfuckers hold grudges and will fucking hunt you down like Scar and shit up in this bitch, is this where this is going? I think this is where this is going. I think he gets eaten by a goddamn Siberian tiger, bro. Like that's the only explanation that I've got in my brain right now.
Get their gear together, and then when they were ready, they could begin this hike to the summit. And so a few days later, on March 27th, Colin and his 3 friends loaded up their car and they drove west to Arshan. And when they got there, they stopped at a local store and got some supplies and then made their way to their cabin. Their cabin was just a single room with a few beds inside of it. It was enough to protect them from the elements, but really nothing more. As for a toilet, the cabin didn't have one, but there was an outhouse outside that they could use. So after the friends moved into the cabin and claimed their beds and put their things down, they all sat down and began prepping their gear and eating some food and chatting. And then finally, at 2 a.m., they decided they needed to go to sleep because their plan was to get on the path up to Love Peak by 7 a.m., which meant they needed to get up at 5 a.m. to make their final preparations. So at 2 a.m., the lights in the cabin turned off and the friends all fell asleep. And then 3 hours later, at 5 a.m., when the lights came back on again, it was immediately clear something was wrong. Colin was not in his bed. His friends assumed when they looked over at his bed and saw his personal belongings were all still there, that Colin must have gotten up and headed outside, maybe to use the outhouse or go for a quick walk, and they just hadn't heard him leaving. And so the three friends initially just kind of shrugged off Colin's absence and said, you know, he'll be back any minute, most likely, and if for some reason he's not back soon, he'll certainly be back by 7 a.m., because that was the agreed upon time they would leave for this hike. But as the minutes ticked closer and closer to 7 a.m. and Colin still had not shown up or tried to call them or do anything, the friends started to worry. It just didn't make any sense that Colin would just get up and leave without telling them where he was going. Finally, at 7 a.m., when Colin still had not shown up and the friends' cursory search of the outside area near the cabin had yielded no results, they decided they had to tell someone. And so they wrote a note addressed to Colin and they put it on the front of their cabin door. And this note basically just told Colin, you know, if you come back here and you see this note, know that we're looking for you. So stay put or tell someone you're here. And so after putting up this note, the friends left the cabin and they headed to the nearest police station where they reported Colin missing. The police would eventually launch this huge search in and around Arshan, both in the forested area right around the village and then also up into the mountains near Love Peak. But despite this huge effort, no one could find Colin. At least
he got eaten, bro. And the fact that the like it was just him that was missing, the tiger had a grudge and was looking for him specifically. I guarantee
not
it
at first.
now. I guarantee it now.
A couple of months ago, I was laying in bed when I heard this strange tapping sound coming from my downstairs. Now, as I'm laying there...
Shout out to you and your damn sponsors. You know what I'm saying? I Simply Safe or whatever, but we're not sponsors, so we're moving on. You know what I'm saying? You know how that go.
On Monday, April 4th, so 8 days into Colin's disappearance, a group of searchers were looking in the forest about 1 mile away from the cabin where Colin and his friends had been staying. And they look up ahead and they see there is this clearing and there's something in the middle of it. And so the searchers begin moving their way towards this clearing, ducking under branches and stepping over brush. And when they get close enough, they can see Colin is in the clearing, and Colin is deceased. He was laying flat on his back with his left arm extended out to the side and his right arm extended but closer to his body, and both of his hands were clenched in tight fists. And on his hands and his wrists were visible abrasions and cuts, which later would be determined to have most likely been caused from someone or something holding onto him, trying to restrain Colin. Colin also had visible abrasions and cuts on the front of his neck. Colin's clothing, which consisted of a long-sleeve thermal shirt, heavy pants, and hiking boots, were ripped and torn in several places. And interestingly, Colin was not wearing socks under his boots. Now, that seems inconsequential, but Colin had had surgery on both of his ankles and had scar tissue on his ankles that if he didn't have socks on, those scars would rub against the inside of his boot. And he said it was very painful. So he always wore socks. Also, Colin's body showed virtually no signs of decomposition, and all of his wounds and abrasions looked, quote, fresh, according to medical personnel. In short, Colin looked like he had recently been in some sort of physical altercation, and whoever or whatever he was grappling with had eventually overpowered him and killed him, although it was not clear how he actually died. Russian authorities were very quick to suspect Colin's 3 friends who had been with him,
Right.
but they were brought into the station and they denied having anything to do with Colin's death, and they all passed their lie detector tests. After that, Russian authorities quickly closed this case by concluding that, well, if his friends didn't do it, then that means Colin must have been high on drugs or drinking alcohol or both, and he just wandered out of his cabin and he got lost in the woods and he died of hypothermia. He froze to death.
So we just write that, we write up, whoa, okay, that's how they do it in Russia. See, the problem is that it was an American that died, and you know how that shit go, right? Like we ain't had a friendly relationship, just as Americans as a whole and Russians as a whole. Like there's a lot of animosity and a lot of tension between the two, you dig? So I can almost say that there was probably a little bit of politics behind that one, you know what I'm saying? That was like, fuck it. I mean, we don't got enough evidence to say the friends did it. We ain't got no evidence to go any further with any of the other shit and the abrasions and all the markings and all the signs of a struggle and force being used in the situation and whatnot. So obviously there was some sort of violent act to invoke death, but we'll just chuck that shit up to hypothermia though. He just froze to death in this bitch because he was high on drugs. Them damn Americans like their drugs and shit. So that's all it was. Like, what kind of fucking shit is that, bro?
However, Colin's parents just could not accept that as being what happened to their son.
Facts.
There were a lot of reasons for skepticism, but the main one was that Colin was an absolute expert at navigating this particular region of Siberia. And so the idea that he would leave his cabin for a quick walk or something and get so completely lost that he would die 8 days later seemed way too far-fetched. And so Colin's parents hired a US-based private lab to do a review of Russia's autopsy of Colin to give their opinion if the autopsy was accurate or not. And this US-based lab pretty much immediately found that the Russian autopsy was not remotely accurate.
Of course
Number
it wasn't.
one, Colin was
What up,
not
Taylor?
under
What
the
up, David?
influence
What up,
of
Anthony?
alcohol or drugs. He was sober. Although technically he did have very small amounts of THC in his urine. THC is the chemical that is found in marijuana, but the amount was
THC?
so
I got some.
little, it basically meant he had consumed the THC days before he went missing. And so he would not have been remotely affected.
So now knowing that, okay, so if this dude who was an American who moved to Russia and was living in Siberia, within Russia or whatever, like one of the harshest environments that you can really live on the planet, and he was managing to get weed, why the fuck did they lock up Brittany Gaynor or whatever her last name is? I always mess it up. It's Gaynor, or I think it's Gaynor. Brittany Gaynor. Why did they lock her up for that little damn stupid ass THC pen? Because obviously the weed is not that hard to get out there in Russia. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, if you can find weed and get weed in the fucking backwoods of Siberia and shit, goddamn, y'all got some weed in that bitch. Y'all, what the fuck kind of shit is it? Y'all, it may not be legal, but y'all obviously out there smoking, okay? Like, if a motherfucker can get the shit in the woods of fucking Siberia and the harshest fucking, climate and situation on the planet, well, goddamn, why the fuck y'all lock that bitch up for the goddamn little fucking THC pen in? That's how you know it's politics, bro. That's politics. That's it right there. There's no other explanation. If a motherfucker get fucking weed in goddamn backwoods of Siberia, it's fucking super easy to get it in the major cities then, obviously.
By that small amount of THC in his system. Number two, the lab determined that Colin almost certainly did not die from hypothermia. Instead, all signs pointed to Colin dying from being suffocated, meaning he was murdered. Someone crushed his airway or in some way restricted him from breathing, and that's what killed him. And three, based on the lack of decomposition, the freshness of the injuries on Colin's body, and the lack of animal predation on his body when they found him, indicated that Colin did not just wander out of his cabin and immediately die somewhere in the forest. Instead, he was alive for most of the time people were looking for him, meaning when they found him, he likely had died within hours of being found. And so these findings by this US-based lab kind of create a general theory about what must have happened to Colin. After Colin left the cabin in the early morning hours of March 28th, maybe to go to the outhouse or to go for a quick walk, when he went outside, someone or something was nearby, and they either lured Colin to them or they straight up ambushed Colin and took him away. Now, we have no idea what happened to Colin after he was abducted, but we can safely assume that after being abducted and taken somewhere, he was alive, and he stayed alive for several days until on the 8th day of his disappearance, Colin was killed, likely by his captor, either at the spot where he was found, or he was killed somewhere else, maybe in the forest, and then moved to the spot where he was found. Many people believe it was the Russian government who targeted Colin, they kidnapped him, and they killed him. And their botched investigation into his death was actually a calculated cover-up. Colin had...
What did I say? Politics. This sounded like some politic ass shit. The fact that they even like closed the case the way they did, and hypothermia. we acknowledge that he had, all these lacerations and, bruising and all these things that would indicate that there was some sort of foul play, but hypothermia. Like, once you said that shit, like, obviously it was politics.
Participated in at least one peaceful environmentalist-led protest in Siberia, and after the protest, Colin apparently got a written warning by the Russian police not to attend another protest. But why would Colin, who was just one of many people involved in these protests, be singled out by the Russian government and killed for his participation? And why would the government elect to kill Colin when he was with 3 of his closest friends who would immediately notice his absence? It just doesn't add up. Today, Colin's parents are still trying to figure out what happened to their son, but unfortunately, their son's case is closed in Russia, and so no one on the Russian side is talking to the parents or giving them any new information. And so as a result, they and the rest of us are left to wonder who or what was lurking in the shadows when Colin stepped out of the cabin that morning. And then where did they take him? And what did they do to him for nearly a week before they killed him deep inside of that Siberian forest?
That's crazy.
So that's going to do it. If you got something out of...
That's crazy. That's definitely some foul play. I don't know how else to explain that shit. That shit is nuts. All right, anyways, moving on to this next one, because that one, like, we're just left with such a cliffhanger. I don't even know what to say. Like, all we can do is speculate and speculate. Like, it's all opinions at this point, and us making, guesstimations of what we felt happened and shit based on our own opinions and the information that we were given. So, yeah, moving on, though. I work with my hand. I told my old lady I'll get mine tattooed on. Yeah, see, I don't necessarily do hard labor, man. I work
in 1967. A man was digging
and technology and shit, pretty much. And then if I'm not doing that, I'm, I work with a fucking printer, so it's still, digital. Like, there's definitely some physical labor involved, but nothing that's gonna cause me to not be able to just wear a ring. So.
In a forest in Canada, when behind him he heard this sudden commotion. It sounded like geese getting really startled and flying off in different directions. And so he put down his pickaxe, he stood up, he turned around, and what he claimed happened next is referred to as the Falcon Lake incident, and it's considered to be one of the most credible paranormal stories of all time. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button if you can borrow their favorite DVD, but instead of watching it, use it as a frisbee with your dog, and then return it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
But definitely do what he said. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification. It's free 99, so yeah, go ahead and join the family. You dig what I'm saying? And if you're feeling real spunky, check out that join button. Become a member, baby.
Just before 11 p.m. at night on May 20th, 1967, a 50-year-old man named Stephen McCulloch staggered into the Misericordia Hospital in Winnipeg, Canada. Stephen was so physically weak that his oldest son, Mark, was there with him, physically holding him up, carrying him into the hospital. When the nurses at the front desk saw the pair walk in, they immediately got up and walked around their desk over to these two guys and said, "Hey, what's going on? What's wrong with him?" And so Stefan at this point is so uncomfortable he can barely talk, but he takes a deep breath and then he tells the nurses that earlier that day he had been burned on his chest and stomach, and now he had this blinding headache and he was so nauseous and he could barely walk. The nurses knew clearly this is an emergency, and so they quickly ushered the pair down the hall to an exam room, and then a couple of minutes later, doctors came into the room and they asked Stefan to show them his burns. Stefan, who was already lying on his back on the exam table, slowly reaches down and grabs the bottom of his shirt and he lifts it up, and the doctors are stunned at what they see on his stomach. There was a very strange burn pattern that none of them had seen before. And so the doctors, they move in to get a better look at his injury, and as they're staring at it, they ask Stefan to explain how he got this burn. Now, what the doctors didn't realize is that Stefan was very conflicted. He knew if he told the truth about how he got this burn, then he would open himself and his family up to ridicule and skepticism. But as he's laying there and the doctors are waiting for his answer, he finally decides that the right thing to do here is just tell the truth. And so he takes a deep breath and then tells the doctors what happened to him. And by the time he was finished telling this story of what happened to his stomach, the doctors had stopped looking at his injury and instead were just standing in the middle of the room staring at Stefan with eyes wide and their mouths open. They were all literally speechless. Within 24 hours, Stefan's story had made news all over the world, and his story had attracted the attention of numerous US and Canadian secretive government agencies who were keen to interview Stefan one-on-one to really find out what he knew. In short, what Stefan claimed happened to him, dubbed the Falcon Lake incident, was a very big deal. However, the farther this story went and the more people that heard it, the more people started to question the validity of this story. It just seemed too unbelievable that maybe Stefan is just lying or this is a hoax. And so before I tell you Stefan's actual account of what happened at Falcon Lake, I'm going to give you a little context about who Stefan was prior to the incident. Because ultimately, Stefan's credibility in your eyes will determine if you really believe what happened to him. Stefan was born in the early 20th century in Poland, and when World War II broke out, he was captured by the Nazis and put into one of their concentration camps. It was called the Gross Rosen camp, and it was located in Poland. During his time at that camp, Stefan would bear witness to the Nazis perpetrating some of the worst atrocities ever committed against humanity. In total, approximately 125,000 people were held prisoner at the Gross Rosen camp, including Stefan. And of those 125,000, 40,000 of them would be killed, primarily on site at the camp, or on a Nazi-led death march. After the camp was finally liberated in early 1945, Stefan worked as a translator for the U.S. Army, helping them continue to liberate other concentration camps across Europe. But by 1946, Stefan was ready to leave Europe and start a new life somewhere else and put World War II behind him. And so he and his wife, who also was held in a concentration camp during World War II, fled Poland with their 3 young kids and resettled in Winnipeg, Canada. And for the next 20 years, the McCullochs lived a very peaceful life. Stefan would find work as a mechanic at a cement factory, and his wife and his kids would make many friends and fall in love with the Winnipeg community. However, the McCullochs' life would take a sudden turn for the worst on May 20th, 1967. That was the day of the Falcon Lake incident. Stefan was a very passionate amateur prospector. A prospector is someone who searches the earth for mineral deposits, usually gold or silver. Stefan would spend much of his off time traveling all over Canada to different wilderness areas to basically hike around the forest and up over the mountains, stopping to hack into the earth with his pickaxe in hope of discovering treasures underneath the surface. Now, Stefan almost never found any treasures on any of his prospecting journeys, but he wasn't really in prospecting for the riches. Stefan just loved being outdoors and being in nature. It was very calming and peaceful for him, and considering how traumatic his earlier life had been, being in the concentration camp during World War II, finding moments of peace in his life was very important to him. And so, in May...
Like, at first I was sitting there thinking, like, I would not, like, Canada is not, like, a place, unless you, like, enjoy, like, the winter time and like snow and all that shit, which I don't like the snow at all. Like if I could just sit in the house during the snowstorms, I'm cool with that. You know what I'm saying? If I got everything I need and I don't got to go outside, I'm cool with that. But if I have to go outside, I don't like the snow. Okay, let me just keep it a buck. But not saying that Canada's don't have, you know, like summer times, because they do, but those are like, I'm pretty sure their summertime is pretty short. You know what I'm saying? So you got a really small window of time where you can go, you know, hiking and camping and doing all that outdoorsy shit without the snow, because the rest of the time you're dealing with fucking snow. So at first I was going to talk some shit like, bro, fuck that. But after kind of thinking about it, like, yeah, I mean, I guess if I was living in a goddamn, or not living, but forced to be in a concentration camp for however much, you know, time he had to do that shit for, yeah, I would probably like the wilderness and by myself and, you know, getting away from fucking people too. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey.
Of 1967, Stefan decided to go out on another one of his prospecting trips, this time to an area called Falcon Lake. Falcon Lake is a fairly large lake located about 100 miles to the east of Winnipeg. And surrounding this lake was a big forest that Stefan had heard contained silver deposits tucked away in the hillsides. And so on Friday, May 19th, Stefan was ready to go on this trip. And so he packed up all of his prospecting equipment, he said goodbye to his wife and his kids, and then he left the house and made his way to the bus stop, where he hopped on a Greyhound bus. 2 hours later, he got off the bus at the stop closest to Falcon Lake, and from there, he made his way to this cheap motel that was right on the side of the highway. He got a room, he got a quick bite to eat in their cafe, and then returned to his room and went to bed. The next morning, May 20th, 1967, so the day of the Falcon Lake incident, Stefan woke up early, right around 5 a.m. And by 5:30 a.m., he had all of his equipment either in his backpack or on his belt, and he was making his way out of the motel's front doors. Right outside of this motel was the highway that ran left to right, and on the other side of that highway was this huge forest that Falcon Lake was deep inside of. And so after Stefan left the motel, he crossed over that highway and began walking into the woods. And for the next several hours, Stefan just kind of meandered his way through the woods. He wasn't on a trail. He was just using his compass to make sure he was generally walking in the direction of Falcon Lake. At around 9 a.m., so he's been hiking now for several hours, he looked up ahead and he saw there was a clearing on the side of this hill. And so Stefan walked into this clearing, and two things became immediately apparent. One, he was right near Falcon Lake. From his perspective on this clearing, he could look down just a couple of 100 feet, and there was the lake. And two, the reason this clearing existed and why no trees were growing on it at all is because under his feet was just a huge rock face, like a quartz vein that was running across this hillside. And so this was like the perfect place for Stefan to begin prospecting. And so he set his things down, he got out his pickaxe, he got his welding gloves on, he put on his welding goggles as well. They protected his eyes from any rocks that were flying as he was hacking into the ground. And then he got to work. For the next couple of hours, Stefan very diligently hacked away at this big rock, but he didn't find any silver or anything else of note. And so around 11 a.m., Stefan was hungry and tired, and so he put his pickaxe down, he took his goggles off, he took his gloves off, and he sat down on this rock facing the lake to have some lunch. And as he sat there enjoying his food, all he could hear in the distance were the sound of a few geese down on the lake making some noise, but other than that, it was totally quiet. After he was done eating, he put his gear back on and got back to work. About an hour later, at around 12:30 12:15 p.m., Stefan was still hacking away at the rock when, despite all the noise he was making as he smashed the ground with his pickaxe, he could hear a really loud commotion coming from behind him. And it turned out when he stopped the pickaxe, the commotion sounded like geese honking and going wild. And so he dropped his pickaxe, he took his goggles, put them up on his forehead, and then he stood up and he turned around and he looked down towards the lake where he heard all these geese going crazy. And the first thing he noticed was there were some geese on the lake that appeared to be flying off in different directions like they had been startled. But what really immediately caught his attention was not the geese, but what had very likely startled the geese. And that was two bright, glowing red objects that were flying slowly across the lake towards him, kind of roughly over where the geese were. Yesterday, my pet frog, Seagull Lung, and I went...
Nope. Shout out to you and your sponsor, but back to the story.
Oh, okay, back to the story.
Yeah, back to the story.
And now these objects, they were cylindrical. They appeared to be about maybe 30 or 40 feet wide. They didn't have any sort of emission coming off of them. They weren't making any noise. They were just kind of slowly making their way over towards where Stefan was.
What up,
now, as Stefan is watching this happen, he wasn't fearful. He assumed those have to be military aircraft. As it was, this part of Canada, Falcon Lake, is very remote. There's not many people around. And so, logically, it made sense that perhaps there's a military that's doing training exercises in this area. And so, feeling much more intrigued than fearful, Stefan just continued to watch as these red aircraft got closer and closer to his side of the lake. And then when these two craft were about 200 feet away from where Stefan was standing, they came to a stop and they were just hovering in the air. And then one of the craft suddenly turned orange and began going up into the clouds, and then at some point just vanished. And then the other craft, instead of going up, just continued descending very slowly, now very clearly towards this open rock face that Stefan was standing on. Now, again, Stefan was totally convinced that these were military aircraft, conducting some sort of exercise. And so he's not...
What kind of like, bro, even in 2022, we don't, like, if I seen some random shit like that, bro, like, I'm not thinking, oh yeah, remote area, military spaceships and shit. Like, no, not even close. Not even to the slightest of that would that even cross my brain at all. Like, what is he talking about, bro? It's 1967. The fuck? Like, pretty sure we still using like propeller engines and shit. Like, fuck out of here. Like, no. Like, that's like what are you talking about? Like, as soon as you would have seen this shit fucking stop and hover, like, yep, no, fuck that. Time to turn around and run. Like, leave all the shit you had and run. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and if that wasn't enough for you, when you seen one of them motherfuckers just change colors and ascend up, straight up, like, where they do that at? We, like, in 1967, we definitely didn't have aircrafts that did shit like that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. Yeah. What? Bruh.
He is just intrigued by what he's seeing. And in fact, by this point, he had convinced himself that this second aircraft that was now coming down to land on these rocks must have experienced some sort of issue, and they were landing in order to fix it. And Stefan even thought to himself, well, hey, I'm a mechanic. Maybe I can help the pilot or pilots with whatever's going on with their craft. Once the craft finally did touch down on the rocks about 150 feet away from Stefan, it changed colors from red to stainless steel with an orange glow around the outside of the aircraft. And inside of this craft, a really bright purple light came on that Stefan was only aware of because there was a couple of small holes on the outside of this craft where this purple light was coming through. But these little rays of purple light coming out of this craft were so bright that it actually was hard for Stefan to look directly at the craft. And so his welding goggles were still on his forehead, so he pulled them down, put them over his eyes, and his welding goggles had a kind of tint to them, so it was like he was looking through sunglasses, and with those on, he was able to continue looking at the craft. And so through his goggles, Stefan is still just standing in the same spot where he first saw these craft, and he's watching this craft that's now landed 150 feet away from him, and he's fully expecting any minute for the pilot or pilots to come out of the craft and explain what's going on. But at first, nothing happens. And so Stefan is just standing there waiting for something to happen when he realizes he has his sketchbook in his pocket. Stefan liked to bring his sketchbook along on his prospecting trips because he liked to sketch things. And so he figured while he waited for the pilot or pilots to emerge, he would sketch the craft. And so for the next couple of minutes, that's what he did. And then after he was done sketching it, he put his sketchbook away, and then really nothing happened for about another 30 minutes. He just stood there and the craft remained motionless. But after about 30 minutes of the craft having landed, it opened. There was like a sliding door on the side of the craft facing Stefan, and it revealed the beautiful, bright purple interior of this craft. But from Stefan's perspective, because of how bright the lights were and how far away he was, he couldn't tell what was inside of the craft.
His problem is.
But Stefan's thinking, okay, clearly now the pilot or pilots are coming outside. And so Stefan felt really relieved, and he was just standing there waiting to talk to whoever was inside. But again, nothing happened. And so now, feeling just plain curious, Stefan decided, you know what, I'm going to walk over there and I'm going to yell into this open door to the pilot or pilots inside and make sure they're okay. And so he starts slowly making his way across the rock face towards this craft and this open door. And when he gets about 60 feet away from the craft, he suddenly stops because now he can hear from inside of this craft the sound of two voices talking to each other. He can't really tell what they're saying, but very clearly there is communication happening inside of this craft. And so Stefan assumed that must be the pilots, and so he called out to them in English. And the second Stefan yelled out to this craft, the voices immediately came to a stop, and they did not respond to Stefan. And so Stefan is calling out to them in English, hey, are you okay? What are you doing in there? And when English didn't work, Stefan called out in Russian. He called out in German, Italian, French, Ukrainian. And when all of those didn't work, he went back to English and just continued kind of calling out, trying to get...
Okay, why the fuck does this motherfucker know like 7 languages and shit? Where did that happen? Okay, they didn't tell us that he, like, in his story, that he knew fucking English, Russian, German, fucking Ukrainian, and fucking Pig Latin, and all the bullshit. Like, what? What? What?
To please come out and talk to him. But he got no response, and no one came out of the craft. And so at this point, Stefan thought, okay, I'm totally committed, so I need to keep going and make sure the pilot or pilots are okay. And so he continued walking closer and closer to this open door of the craft, and when he got about 10 feet away, he was suddenly struck by the incredible craftsmanship of this craft. He couldn't see any rivets anywhere on this amazing piece of machinery, meaning this craft appeared like it had somehow been carved out of one enormous piece of steel, which seemed totally impossible. Also, Stefan noticed there were no insignia on the outside of this craft. There was no flag or anything kind of denoting who was flying it. There was really nothing on the outside of the craft. But Stefan just kept on going until he was standing right outside of this open door. He's only a couple feet away from it, and now he's looking directly inside, and he doesn't see the pilot or pilots. And in fact, because of how bright this purple light is coming out, even with his goggles, it's really hard to see what's inside of this craft. But he can clearly see inside there is some sort of panel in the back of the craft with lots of flashing lights, almost like a computer, and there were other kind of columns of light moving around inside the craft at different angles. But after looking in this craft for only a few seconds, the door suddenly slid shut. And then Stefan, without really thinking about it, reached out and touched the craft. And the second he did that, two things happened. One, the hand that he touched the craft with, he was wearing a big welding glove, and the second he made contact with that craft, the leather glove began to melt. Not even catch on fire, it just instantly began to melt.
What?
And so he began frantically ripping the glove off to get it off of him to avoid injury. And then the second thing that happened is the craft began rotating counterclockwise until this vent that was on the outside of the craft, one of the very few things that was on the outside of the craft that actually Stefan had noted in his sketch. He had drawn this grate that sat on the outside of the craft. This grate rotated around until it was aimed directly at Stefan. Now, to picture this grate, picture like a vent you would see inside of a building where air conditioning blows air out of, right? It's kind of like that same size, the size of a license plate on a car. And instead of there being vertical slats along the vent, like you would see with an air conditioning vent cover, on this vent, on this craft, it was like a checkerboard pattern with little buttonholes all over this vent. And so Stefan is looking at this vent, and then suddenly something shoots through the vent, like an explosion that hits him square in the chest and lights him on fire. His shirt is literally in flames, and so Stefan is frantically trying to rip off his shirt. He throws it on the ground, he's stomping the flame, and as he's doing that, he looks up and sees this craft has somehow immediately shot into the sky and is now disappearing into the clouds. Now, Stefan had no idea what just happened. All he knew is his chest and his stomach now hurt tremendously. But before he could deal with that, he developed this unbelievable headache. He suddenly felt so nauseous, and he felt delirious, like he was drunk. Trying not to panic, Stefan, who now is shirtless and badly burned, he ran over and grabbed some of his things, and then he began heading back into the woods to make his way back towards the motel. It would take him several hours of stumbling through the forest, stopping periodically to vomit, but he would eventually reach the highway, he would cross over, and he would make his way into the motel right around 4 p.m. And when he got there, he made his way into the cafe, and he asked the staff if they knew where the nearest doctor was. These staff members would later tell investigators that when Stefan came tumbling into the cafe without his shirt on, looking totally horrible, they assumed he was drunk. But after talking to him, he didn't smell at all like alcohol. Instead, he reeked of this horrible sulfur smell. The staff would tell Stefan that the nearest doctor was 45 miles away. And so at this point, Stefan decided his best bet was actually to just get on a bus and go back to Winnipeg, where his family could take him to the nearest hospital. And so somehow, Stefan managed to make his way to the bus stop. He hopped on a Greyhound bus, he went to Winnipeg, and then his oldest son, Mark, met him at the bus stop and practically carried him into the hospital. The very strange checkerboard burn pattern found on Stefan's abdomen, where he claims this craft turned its vent and fired on him, were determined not to be thermal burns, meaning he didn't get them from something hot touching his skin, like everyone initially suspected. Instead, they were determined to be chemical burns, but literally no one, doctors, scientists, government agencies, no one could figure out what chemical actually burned his skin. In fact, no one was ever able to actually identify what was causing all of these ailments that Stefan was complaining of, from the headache to the nausea to the weakness to these burns. And he was tested for basically everything, from radiation poisoning to very common ailments and illnesses, and everything came back negative. Experts would go out to Falcon Lake, to the area that Stefan described seeing this craft, and sure enough, they would find an open rock face, and right around the area that Stefan described was this circular burn pattern, as if something had been perched right there that shot some sort of exhaust into the ground, and the area around this landing site was determined to be highly radioactive, although it is assumed that the reason that area is radioactive is because there is a vein of radium that runs underneath the rocks near the area. However, what no one could explain away were the 3 identical pieces of what looked like metal, which actually turned out to be a very rare type of silver, that were located near this burn circle. Now, even though the Falcon Lake area was known apparently for having silver deposits up in the hillsides, this silver, these 3 pieces of silver, were not from the hillsides of Falcon Lake. This silver was heavily manufactured. Someone, something, some machine had manipulated the metal to bend and be cut in a very particular way. And all three of these pieces of very rare silver were highly radioactive. They would also find traces of this very rare type of silver that seemed to have seeped into some of the loose rocks that were inside of that burned out circle, almost like the silver had melted into the rock. But despite these pieces of evidence that do seem to suggest that Stefan really did see some craft land on these rocks, and despite the fact that the US government and the Canadian government both thoroughly investigated this case and they were not able to debunk it, they basically said, well, something happened, but we don't know what. Despite all of that, Stefan and his family's lives were forever upended after this incident. Stefan was ridiculed and accused of lying and of being crazy, and his kids were unfortunately bullied at school. Shortly before Stefan died in 1999 at the age of 83, he was asked if he regretted coming forward with this story, and he would say, yes, I wish I never told anyone. But he would also say, at the time, he really felt like he had a duty to tell the world about what happened. Stefan never changed his story, and he never came out and said, I think this craft came from another world, another planet, another universe. He just said, look, I think it was an experimental aircraft. That's it. He also never made a dime on this experience. If anything, he lost money because he paid to write a 40-page pamphlet that explained what happened to him, and then he left all these copies on his porch. So if news people showed up or if nosy neighbors showed up and had questions, he would just point to the stack of the books and say, take one and read it.
Shit, I mean...
So that's gonna do it.
That's a hell of a way to kind of just... go out about the situation, you know what I'm saying? Like, damn, that shit was wild, bro. Like, that was one of them stories where you're just like, you had to just listen. You know what I'm saying? Like, I couldn't really stop it and talk, and like, there was moments where you're just like, I was just fucking confused, right? Like, why he wasn't running. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there was definitely some odd thought processes going on with that man. Like, I don't know, man. He was just way too desensitized to everything. Like the concentration camps and all that shit. Like he had seen it all at that point, I guess. Like, fuck, you know what I mean? Like I can't fathom that part. Like that's the part that fucked me up for real.
In 2016, a couple was walking up this dirt path on this wooded hillside.
We got this last one right here from MrBallen. She saw the warning, but went anyways. Sounds crazy. Let's go.
Came up to this huge barbed wire fence, and all over this fence were signs saying no trespassing and warning people that what was on the other side of this fence was very dangerous. But the couple ignored these signs and slipped through a break in the fence to the other side and just kept on walking. Minutes later, that couple would come face to face with a monster. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to do the like button's dishes, but be sure to leave all of the cups and bowls right side up inside of their dishwasher. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. While she was in high school in Dayton, Ohio, Raquel Bain became known as a bit of a thrill seeker, primarily because she would do something called car surfing, which is exactly what it sounds like. She would climb onto the exterior of cars and hold on to the roof while somebody else drove it around. In addition to seeking out these physical thrills, Raquel was also drawn to psychological ones, like going to places that were supposedly haunted and seeing if she could spook herself. Following high school, Raquel kind of calmed down and
Bruh, this shit's supposed to be nuts. Like, what kind of shit is that? Let's go to a haunted house situation or scary place and just see if I can spook myself. Like, what?
less of the wild teenager she was known for being,
And the car
and
surfing.
instead she
That
really
shit's just
focused
dumb.
on building a life and a career for herself. And so she would go to college and she would earn her degree in surgical technologies, and then by 2009 she was employed full-time as a surgical assistant in Dayton. Also around that time, she had her first child, a son who she adored. But despite creating this life full of stereotypically adult, mature things like having a career and starting a family, deep down, Raquel was still very much the thrill-seeking wild teenager she was back in high school. But as an adult, she just never had time to go seek out those thrills. So, with that in mind, fast forward to April of 2016. By this point, Raquel is 26 years old, and that month, a very rare weekend popped up where Raquel did not have to work and she didn't have any childcare responsibilities. And so, wanting to take advantage of this free time, Raquel asked her boyfriend, 41-year-old David Nee, if he would join her on a road trip that weekend to Louisville, Kentucky, where Raquel wanted to check out the infamously scary Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Back in the
What?
1900s, Waverly Hills was a
Please.
place where tuberculosis
That's so funny. Nigga, fuck that. If Renee ever came to me and was like, you want to go sneak into this crazy ass fucking scary Waverly Hills Sanatorium, I'd have been like, no, bitch, I don't want to do that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, no. Like, what are you talking about? No. There's no fucking way. There's no way that I would ever agree to that. No.
were sent. Tuberculosis, or TB for short, is an infection of the lungs and it can be deadly. Today, there's a cure for it, but back in the early
Before you go, sign this goddamn insurance policy because goddamn it, if some fucking crazy shit happens, I ain't gonna be there to say your ass. So I need to make sure that we got everything taken care of because you making this decision on your fucking own. You know what I'm saying? So if you're gonna make these life or death situations and decisions and shit, well, I need you to go ahead and sign your name right here. You know what I'm saying? Sign your name on this dotted line right here. You know what I'm saying? For this insurance policy, because I'm not condoning this bullshit. You dig?
1800s, there wasn't. And so most of the people who went to Waverly Hills died there, and usually very slowly and painfully and in total isolation from their families, because in virtue of being sent to Waverly Hills, they were effectively being quarantined to stop the spread of the disease. Waverly Hills would eventually shut down permanently in 1961 because by that point the cure had been found, and after it shut down, the building basically just sat there. Nobody else came in and turned it into anything else. And so this building is basically abandoned, and lots of people began sneaking in to see what it was like in there, and a shocking number of these trespassers reported seeing ghosts inside. Today, the sanatorium is still very much in the same condition it was left in, but the Waverly Hills Historical Society has stepped in and made it very hard for people to sneak into the building. However, knowing people do want to go in and look around, the Historical Society has begun offering guided tours of the sanatorium, and these tours are given exclusively at night to increase the spooky effect. And so David, who had only been dating Raquel for a month when she asked him to come with her to the sanatorium,
oh, we've only been dating for a month? Oh yeah, you gotta go. You just sealed the deal. I'll go ahead and peace. Yeah, I don't think our interests align in any fucking way, shape, or form. So yeah, you have fun with that shit, and you don't hit me up when you get back, okay? Just go ahead and call this it right here. We're calling it quits. You know what I'm saying? You made that decision on your own, and I'm just gonna go with it. I'm just gonna run with this. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna run with this, because I feel like this is gonna become a habit of yours, where you asking me weird things like, let's go to scary places and shit, and I'm just not gonna ever be with it. So, nope. I like just sitting at home, watching this shit on computer screens, not doing it in real life. No, thank you.
really that keen on doing this. It did not really appeal to him to go walking around this totally terrifying place. But he could tell it was important to Raquel. She was really excited about it, and so he agreed to go. A few days later, on the late afternoon of April 23rd, the new couple left Raquel's place, they climbed into the car, and they began driving south. 3 hours later, they arrived in Louisville and they stopped to get dinner. And then after they were done eating, they looked at the time and realized it was only about 6:45 p.m. And the tour they had scheduled at the sanatorium was not until 10 p.m. So they had a few hours to kill. And before David could suggest anything, Raquel already had the perfect idea of how they should kill this time. She told David that earlier that day, she had learned about a spot just outside of Louisville that might actually be more terrifying than the sanatorium they had come all this way to see. And so Raquel wanted to spend these few hours checking out this new spooky spot. This spooky spot was a rickety old, narrow, abandoned-looking bridge called the Pope Lick Trestle. It's located just east of downtown Louisville in this heavily wooded area. The bridge is about 800 feet long, and at its highest point, right in the middle of the bridge, it's about 90 to 100 feet off the ground. And this bridge connects the tops of two of the bigger rolling hills in the area. But the bridge's physical appearance has nothing to do with why it's considered so spooky. The reason the Pope Lick Trestle has become a central part of Kentucky folklore is because locals say there is a monster called the Pope Lick Monster that lives underneath the bridge. It's half goat, half man, and when anyone is near this bridge at night, this monster is supposed to come out from underneath this bridge, and then what happens next is very ambiguous. It kind of depends on who you're talking to, but generally speaking, once the Pope Lick Monster has emerged and it sees you, you're dead. Now, how you die ranges from the monster leaping out and attacking you with an axe to the monster using some sort of mind control to lure you up onto the bridge where you leap off. David, after hearing this suggestion, was again not really that keen to go do this really terrifying sounding thing, but seeing the excitement in his girlfriend's face, he agreed to go. And so the two left.
Pussy makes motherfuckers do dumb stuff, bro. Oh my God, bro. Oh my God. Dog, there's more vagina in the world. You don't gotta go do stupid shit like that. Your mind was telling you the right thing. You had a reluctant moment for a fucking reason. Listen to your intuition. What the fuck's wrong with you? You know what I'm saying? That shit ain't that goddamn good. I don't give a fuck. No way. No way.
Restaurant, they climbed back in the car and they drove for about 15 or 20 minutes to the Pope Lick Trestle Bridge. The bridge actually passed over a relatively main road, and so the couple parked just off the side of this main road, and then once they were outside, they began looking for a pathway up this hillside to get up to the bridge. And very quickly, they found a well-worn dirt path that snaked up the side of this wooded hillside that looked very much like it would bring them up to the bridge. So with Raquel in front and David behind her, they began walking up this dirt path. And as they're walking, they start to see signs that clearly say, no trespassing. But they ignore them because they're looking at this path thinking, okay, lots of people clearly come up here, so we've got to be okay. And so they keep on walking up this path and they're getting closer and closer to the top of this hill where they think it's going to connect with this bridge. And right as they're getting close, they see there's this huge chain link fence, this 8-foot tall chain link fence with barbed wire across the top that extends in either direction out of view. And so the couple walks up to this fence and there are more signs that say no trespassing, private property, and there are additional warning signs saying that what is on the other side of this fence is also just plain dangerous. So turn around and leave.
People's curiosity.
Every fall, when the leaves start to turn colors and the weather starts to get cool, people flock in droves to their nearest coffee shop to order a pumpkin spice latte. And every year when I see this...
Shout out to you, Mr. Ballen, and your sponsorship, but moving on. We want to get back to the story.
As Raquel and David are staring at all these signs and this fence, they see, not far from the path, somebody had clearly bent two of the fence posts and created a narrow gap in the fence that you could slip through. And so from David and Raquel's perspective, that looked like the way other trespassers must have found their way up to the bridge, and so it must be safe. And so once again, the couple disregarded all the warnings. They made their way over to this gap in the fence, they both slipped through, and they kept on walking up the hill. Just a couple of minutes later, they reached this clearing, which was at the top of this hill, and once they were in this clearing, they were able to turn, and they could actually see the bridge. It was only a couple hundred feet away from them, and it was totally intimidating. By this point, it's totally dark out, and from their perspective, all they see is this very narrow bridge that they know is 100 feet off the ground at certain points, and they can see there's no guardrails on either side of this bridge. It would have almost looked like a tightrope kind of extending off into the darkness. But even if the couple was really intimidated by the sight of this bridge and with all these warning signs before it, they were able to put their fear aside and just keep on going. And so with David now in the lead and Raquel behind him, they walked the couple of hundred feet over to the start of this narrow bridge. And when they got there, without actually stepping onto the bridge, David came to a stop. He turned around to face Raquel, and he gestured for her to come stand next to him so they could take a selfie with the bridge in the background. Because David at this point is thinking, we're not going to go on this bridge. We're just going to look at this bridge, take some pictures, and then we'll go. But Raquel, who he's looking at, gesturing to come stand with him, just walks right past him onto the bridge and takes several steps out onto this narrow, rickety old thing, and then she stops, turns around, and gestures for David to come with her and walk across the entire bridge. And David, again, is having his second thoughts, but he sees Raquel wants to do this, and so he agrees to go. After they had walked about 100, maybe 200 feet across this bridge, the two of them just started laughing because it was totally exhilarating what they were doing. Not so much the quest for the Pope Lake monster, but rather the very real risk they were taking walking this tightrope bridge in the middle of the night. The couple would continue to very cautiously but quickly make their way across this bridge, and when they reached about the halfway point, when they were at the highest point from the ground, the bridge itself begins to shake. And then from behind them, they hear this loud grinding sound. And so the couple, they whip their heads around and they see there are these two bright glowing lights that are looking right at them all the way on the start of the bridge. And they realize it's a train. When Raquel and David walked up that dirt path and snuck through the fence and reached the top of the hill and could actually see the Pope Lick Trestle Bridge, they would have also seen the train tracks in the hillside that clearly extended onto the Pope Lick Trestle and went across the bridge. This was a train bridge. They would have seen that. But it's assumed that the couple, who didn't live in the area and so didn't know much about the Pope Lick Trestle, it's assumed they thought, well, you know, this is a train bridge, but it's got to be abandoned. It certainly looks abandoned, and it does. It looks totally old. It does not look active, even though it is. Or the couple thought, well, this is just an old train bridge. It might be active, but surely no train is going to come through anytime soon. We can get across the bridge before a train arrives. But, of course, they were wrong. When the couple turned around and saw these two headlights bearing down on them, they quickly realized they would not be able to outrun this train. The train's clearly trying to stop. It has seen them. It's hitting its brakes. It's sounding its horn, but it's just clearly moving too quickly. So they cannot run to the other side to safety. And because this bridge was meant for a single train to pass through, there was no other track they could just jump onto to avoid being hit. And there were no walkways on either side of this railway. And so literally all they had was the track that this train was going to cross over, and they were on it. And so with no other choices, David yells to Raquel that they have to climb down and hang off the side of this bridge. Now, there were these wooden slats that ran underneath the rails. They ran perpendicular to the rails, and these wooden slats kind of extended off the edge of the bridge on either side just a couple of inches. And so in theory, if you were holding onto the outside of one of these wooden slats and kind of dangling off the edge of the bridge, a train could cross those tracks and and not run over your hands or fingers. You would just have to hold on that whole time as the train is rumbling through. And so David, he flops down onto his stomach, and he's trying to lower himself as fast as he can as this train is getting closer and closer, and he's yelling for Raquel to do the same thing, but she's not really moving very quickly. And finally, David, he gets in position. He's hanging off the edge of this bridge on these wooden slats, and he sees Raquel. She's not quite there, and then the train comes flying through. It strikes Raquel and sends her flying off the bridge to the ground below. David would somehow manage to hold on the whole time as this train went past him, and then once the train had passed him, he pulled himself back up onto the tracks. He ran the rest of the way across the bridge. He went down that hillside, and when he found Raquel, it was immediately apparent that she was deceased. In the end, the railroad was not issued any citations or sued for negligence. It was determined they did their due diligence by setting up that 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence with all those signs telling people to stay back and warning people about the hazards of going past this fence. And so it was actually David who got in trouble for this tragedy. He was cited and charged with a felony of unlawfully disrupting and or delaying a train, causing financial damages. He would plead to a lesser charge of trespassing and would be fined $2,300. Shockingly, this tragedy is just one of many that have occurred on the Pope Lick Trestle Bridge. Since the bridge's construction in the 1800s, there have been dozens of people who have died on this bridge. And several of these deaths, many of them fairly recent, the last 20 or so years, have occurred under the same conditions as Raquel's. People went looking for the Pope Lick monster and then were struck by a train.
That's crazy. So why the fuck do they not just put up a sign that just says active train? These train tracks are active. Like, keep your ass off unless you want to get hit by a train. Like, just keep it a buck with people.
So
Shit.
That's going to do it.
There
If you
ain't no
got something out of
monster,
today's episode and you haven't
It ain't a monster on this fucking thing. It's a goddamn train, and we keep running you stupid motherfuckers over. So how about you just keep your dumb asses off? How about that one? How, you know what I'm saying? Like, why can that just not be a sign since you got every other fucking else? Other, you know what I'm saying? All these other goddamn signs and shit. Just keep it a buck. You know what I mean? I'm just saying. I'm not quite understanding why that isn't just the thing, you know, that they decided to do. Anyways, let's end this one off with a police video. We haven't done a police video in a while since we've been gone and haven't, you know, had time. I feel like that's just a nice way. Let's just end it off with a nice little police video, and you know, yeah, I just feel like that. Just feel like that. Here's how to become a criminal and make it worse for yourself. Man drives in the oncoming. Damn, 130. All right. Those are some decent ones. Hold on. A woman named Honesty arrested for shoplifting. Ain't that ironic? Does anyone in the car have a driver's license? Oh man, the whole car was fucking. Oh man, those sounds pretty alright. Them sounds pretty alright too. Hold on, where's that other channel we have? See, we haven't been on YouTube or watching videos in a while. I don't even remember what all the names of the channels are that we'd be watching. Oh, Audit to Audit, that's another good one. Hold on. Might be a good one in here. Damn. Largest lawsuit ever filed again? Okay, we gotta see this shit. That one caught my attention. Alright. For sure, Nugget, just hit me up. What up, Camo Steve?
Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers railroad tracks, due process, and unreasonable seizures, and is brought to us by 9 News' channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into today's interaction, I want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Incogni, a new product from our friends.
All right, shout out to you and your sponsors, but we're moving on.
20% off of your Incogni service. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring this episode. Shortly after 7:30 p.m. on Friday, September 16, 2022, 20-year-old TSA agent Yareni Rios Gonzalez was pulled over just north of Platteville, Colorado by an unidentified officer from the Platteville Police Department, who was quickly joined by 2 unidentified officers from the Fort Lupton Police Department. The officers were responding to a call regarding a potential road rage incident involving a firearm. Ms. Rios Gonzalez stopped her vehicle just past a set of railroad tracks, and the Platteville officer parked his vehicle behind her on the tracks.
This is that one.
All 3 officers...
Bro, I know exactly which one this is. This is that crazy ass... So this right here shows the crazy negligence of officers, bro. Why on God's fucking earth would you park on the middle of a fucking railroad track? Okay? Again, why would you put somebody who you've detained in the back of a fucking railroad, in the back of a car that's parked on a railroad track? 3, why in God's motherfucking earth, what the fuck? When you seen and heard this goddamn train, because at every goddamn crossing, they always start honking fucking a half mile, maybe even a mile out or whatever the fuck. You know the motherfucker's coming. And it's nighttime, so they got their lights on and shit. So you see this bitch coming. And nobody thought to go ahead and move the fucking car. Hey, man, you got this fucking car with this lady parked in it on the railroad track, and there's a train coming, so you should probably move it. But they don't. And then the fucking train proceeds to crash into the police car with, bruh, this shit's nuts. I'm sorry.
Exited their vehicles and began to shout orders at Ms. Rios Gonzalez.
This shit is fucking crazy. Watch this.
Driver, let me see your hand.
Put both hands out the window. Both hands out.
Dispatch Lupton 346. We're getting commands. Her hands are out the window at this time.
Open your door. With your right hand, open your door. Come on out.
Yeah.
Keep your hands up. Come on out.
Dispatch Lupton 346. She's out of the vehicle. Hands are visible.
Who else in the car with you?
You want to go to this side?
Yeah.
She's
Vasquez.
complaining and everything. Look at this. Look, parked right in the middle of a fucking railroad track. Look at this shit. Look at this shit.
Turn around.
There ain't no fucking denying this shit. Look, it's on body cam. Oh, dumb.
Put your hands up higher. I want you to set your phone down at the edge of your truck.
On your left.
You don't need it. You can leave it on. Come on back. Keep coming back. Keep your hands up. Keep coming back. Keep coming back to the sound of my voice. Keep coming back. Keep coming back. Keep coming back. Keep coming back. Stop right there. Get down on one knee and then the other.
I got cuffs. Good? Keep your hands above your head.
Don't move.
What's going on? Why am I doing this?
This shit is
We'll
nuts.
explain everything in a second. Can I get my cell phone, please?
No one else is in the truck, sir. Can I please get my cell phone?
We'll get it for you.
Worry
Stand
about
up.
yourself.
Where are you taking me?
We're taking you to the car. Come on.
Why? What?
Do you have anything on you that's going to poke me, shoot me, hurt me?
No, ma'am, but can I please get my cell phone?
We'll get your cell phone in a second. Is there any weapons in the car?
Ready?
No, ma'am, there's nothing on.
There's no weapons in the car? Okay.
Everybody else in the car, come on.
What's going on? Ma'am, what's going on?
I'll tell you in a second. Take a
I'm
seat.
so confused. Can I get
Take a
my
seat.
cell phone?
I will get your cell phone for you. Take a seat.
The female officer handcuffs
Wow,
Ms.
bro.
Rios Gonzalez and places her in the back seat of the police cruiser that is parked on the train tracks. Under Section 42-4-1204 of the Colorado Revised Statutes, quote, no person shall stop, stand, or park a vehicle except when necessary to avoid conflict with other traffic or in compliance with the directions of a police officer or an official traffic control device on any railroad tracks. Any person who violates any provision of this section commits a Class B traffic infraction. Despite this, Section 42-4-108 of the Colorado Revised Statutes provides that, quote, the driver of an authorized emergency vehicle, when responding to an emergency call, or when in pursuit of an actual or suspected violator of the law, may park or stand, irrespective of the provisions of this title. However, the statute also includes a caveat that, quote, the provisions of this section shall not relieve the driver of an authorized emergency emergency vehicle from the duty to drive with due regard for the safety of all persons, nor shall such provisions protect the driver from the consequences of such driver's reckless disregard for the safety of others. It seems obvious that parking a vehicle on train tracks, let alone leaving a handcuffed individual in the back seat of an unattended cruiser parked on railroad tracks, demonstrates a clear, reckless disregard for the safety of others, not only for Ms. Rios Gonzalez herself, but also for any personnel or passengers of an approaching train. And it is therefore likely that a court would conclude that parking on train tracks in this situation was a violation of the Colorado Traffic Code.
I see a car seat.
Sure the fuck was.
Clear. Okay, let's get the bed. Come across. Here. Dispatch looking 348. Vehicle's clear. You can raise the channel.
It took her a long time to pull over.
I got a holster right here in the passenger seat.
It took her a very long time to pull over.
I'm going.
Did you see her toss anything?
She could have, because it took her a long time to pull over.
As Ms. Rios Gonzalez remains handcuffed and locked in the back of the unattended cruiser, the officers search her vehicle for a firearm without taking any actions to ensure her safety despite her vulnerable position on the train tracks. In general, as the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Colorado, explained in the 2003 case of Raska ex Raska versus Peterson, quote, states must ensure reasonable care and safety to persons within their custody. Under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, government officials cannot, quote, deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And as the Supreme Court noted in the 1977 case of Ingram versus Wright, quote, the liberty preserved from deprivation without due process included the right to be free from and to obtain judicial relief for unjustified intrusions on personal security. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court concluded in the 1989 case of DeShaney versus Winnebago County Department of Social Services that, as a general matter, the Due Process Clause does not create a state duty to protect an individual against injury caused by a third party. However, the court also noted that, quote, when the state takes a person into its custody and holds him there against his will, the Constitution imposes upon it a corresponding duty to assume some responsibility for his safety and general well-being. The court further explained that, quote, the affirmative duty to protect arises from the limitation which it is imposed on his freedom to act on his own behalf. It is the state's affirmative act of restraining the individual's freedom to act on his own behalf through incarceration, institutionalization, or other similar restraint of personal liberty, which is the deprivation of liberty, triggering the protections of the Due Process Clause. Still, as the Supreme Court held in the 1986 case of Daniels versus Williams, quote, the Due Process Clause is simply not implicated by a negligent act of an official causing unintended loss of or injury to life, liberty, or property. And the mere lack of due care by a state official cannot deprive an individual of life, liberty, or property under the 14th Amendment. Rather, as the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals detailed in the 1990 case of Berry versus City of Muskogee, a government actor must act with so-called deliberate indifference towards a confined individual's safety in order for the Due Process Clause to be implicated. In the Berry case, the 10th Circuit explained that, quote, deliberate indifference does not require a finding of express intent to harm, but must involve more than ordinary lack of due care for the prisoner's interests or safety, and that while requiring a higher degree of fault than negligence, or even gross negligence, the deliberate indifference standard, quote, remains lower than the intentional and malicious infliction of injury. The court therefore concluded that, quote, an official acts with deliberate indifference if its conduct disregards a known or obvious risk that is very likely to result in the violation of a prisoner's constitutional rights. In this situation, there is a strong argument that leaving Ms. Rios Gonzalez in the back of a police cruiser parked on train tracks would satisfy the deliberate indifference standard, because the officers demonstrated a total disregard for the
There is no, logical explanation to excuse
danger posed by parking on railroad tracks. However, as we will discuss momentarily, it is also possible that a court could conclude that a different legal standard should be applied to this situation.
She could have, because when I was behind her, she was driving slow enough.
Yeah.
So she could have tossed something, but I literally...
Tossed it out the window?
She could have, out that window, but...
No, that's
Where'd your car?
Optometrist. Oh my god. Medical emergent. The suspect was in the vehicle that was hit by the train.
stupid.
Watch the fence.
While the officers continue to search the vehicle, a train approaches and hits the unattended cruiser, which is still parked on the tracks with Ms. Rios-Gonzalez inside. As we discussed earlier in this episode, the Due Process Clause of the Constitution prohibits officers from taking actions that demonstrate deliberate indifference towards the well-being of individuals they have taken into custody. However, in the 2014 case of Walton versus Gomez, the 10th Circuit specified that, while, quote, the 14th Amendment governs any claim of excessive force brought by a pre-trial detainee who has had a judicial determination of probable cause as a prerequisite to the extended restraint of his liberty following arrest, the 4th Amendment, not the 14th, governs excessive force claims arising from, quote, treatment of an arrestee detained without a warrant and prior to any probable cause hearing. According to the 10th Circuit in the 2019 case of McCowan versus Morales, quote, a 4th Amendment excessive force claim is governed by a purely objective standard. A police officer violates an arrestee's 4th Amendment right to be free from excessive force during an arrest if the officer's actions were not objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting him. This reasonableness standard is generally much easier to meet than the deliberate indifference standard applied in due process cases, but it is uncertain which standard a court reviewing this situation would apply. Although the 10th Circuit seemed to make it clear in the Walton case that the 4th Amendment would apply to an arrestee who had not yet received a probable cause hearing, in the 1997 case of Berry versus Grand County, Utah, the 10th Circuit applied the deliberate indifference standard to a case involving the suicide of an individual who had been arrested without a warrant and was being held in jail before a probable cause determination. The court reasoned that the reasonableness standard would only apply to claims of excessive force, and that because jail suicide claims are, quote, considered and treated as claims based on the failure of jail officials to provide medical care for those in their custody, the deliberate indifference standard should apply. Still, it should be noted that in a concurring opinion to the decision, Circuit Judge Briscoe argued that, quote, where the 4th Amendment applies, it does not prohibit only use of excessive force, but rather prohibits any unreasonable seizure. In looking to the nature of the injury to determine the standard to be applied, the majority ignores the principle that the standard comes not from the classification of the injury the plaintiff suffered, but from the constitutional provision which was violated to cause the injury. Because the situation in this episode is largely unprecedented, it is certainly possible that a court could adopt Judge Briscoe's reasoning and conclude that the circumstances surrounding Ms. Rios-Gonzalez's arrest were unreasonable in violation of the 4th Amendment. It is also possible that a court would determine that the 14th Amendment deliberate indifference should apply, as Ms. Rios-Gonzalez was not subject to any force directly from the officers. Either way, Ms. Rios-Gonzalez has a persuasive argument that the officers violated her constitutional rights in some capacity by subjecting her to unnecessary and life-threatening danger by putting her directly into harm's way.
There may still be a firearm in the vehicle. I don't know if you guys have been through it yet. We weren't sure if she threw it or if it's still hidden in the vehicle somewhere. It took her a long time to pull over.
Right now, I just need to find out who she is. You hear that?
No, I didn't hear that.
There's a round over there in the door.
We had a date of birth on there.
That's what I was looking for.
I know you know what you're doing. I was just thinking out loud.
I'll let you look at that. I'll keep looking for the other stuff. ID could be in the console. There's your gun.
After the accident, Ms. Rios-Gonzalez was transported to a Greeley hospital for treatment, where it was determined that she had suffered 9 broken ribs, a broken arm that required surgery, a broken leg, a fractured sternum, and back and head injuries. She spent more than a week in the hospital before being released and still has a long recovery period ahead of her. According to her attorney, Paul Wilkinson, Ms. Rios-Gonzalez remembered many details from the crash and told him that, quote, she was trying to get the police officers' attention, screaming at them. She tried unlocking the door. She had her hands behind her back and was frantically trying to unlock the door. Mr. Wilkinson also stated that Ms. Rios-Gonzalez intends to file a lawsuit against the police departments involved. Multiple agencies are investigating the various aspects of the incident, with the Fort Lupton Police Department handling the initial criminal investigation, the Colorado State Patrol investigating the serious injury traffic accident between the train and the cruiser, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation reviewing the serious bodily injury that Ms. Rios-Gonzalez suffered while in police custody. Platteville Police Chief Carl Dwyer has confirmed that the Platteville police officer involved is on paid administrative leave while an investigation occurs, but did not divulge the officer's name. The Fort Lupton Police Department has declined to comment on the situation. Overall, the Platteville and Fort Lupton officers get an F. for
Facts.
demonstrating a blatant disregard for Ms. Rios-Gonzalez's personal safety, needlessly forcing her into a highly dangerous situation with no way to protect herself, and focusing more on discovering a firearm in Ms. Rios-Gonzalez's vehicle than ensuring that she did not lose her life while they did so. At the very best, these officers exhibited a complete lack of common sense and a truly astonishing level of incompetence by not only parking on railroad tracks, but then placing a handcuffed suspect in the vehicle and leaving her there unattended. It is honestly remarkable that Ms. Rios-Gonzalez survived this encounter, and I would urge the police agencies involved to hold these officers accountable for their reckless and unacceptable actions. As for Ms. Rios-Gonzalez, I cannot rightfully assign a grade to someone who was entirely the victim of police ineptitude, and there was nothing Ms. Rios-Gonzalez could have done to prevent the harm that was inflicted on her. That being said, I commend Ms. Rios-Gonzalez for her perseverance and for pursuing legal action against the officers and departments responsible for her traumatic injuries. I wish her a rapid...
She's a TSA agent. TSA agents have fucking guns. Like, that's... Oh, like, what do you expect? Like,
recovery from her injuries, and it'll be interesting to see how this case plays out in the courtroom. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.
Yeah, that shit is so crazy. Like, the negligence of the cops in that whole situation. Like, just the common sense. Like, why would you not just pull up a little bit further? You know what I'm saying? Like, there was definitely enough room where you could have just pulled right up on her ass and been off the fucking train tracks. Shit, when you went and put her in the fucking car, you could have just backed it up or pulled forward or pulled her, pulled in front of the fucking truck or something. Like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like there's so many other things you could have did besides just let this lady get fucking demolished by a fucking train because you're fucking stupid. That's so crazy. But anyways, man, I love you guys. I'm glad to be back, and we back in action, you dig? So, be ready for some reactions. Be ready for us to go live again here on Wednesday. Jamaica's internet and Wi-Fi was just not cracking, bro. It just was not good. I didn't have service the first few days before my phone broke. I did, but I didn't. It was like on some whack-ass, like, 3G shit, you know what I'm saying? There was no upload speed, you dig? It was like going back to, 2010 and shit. Like, it was fucking wild. It was nuts. You know what I'm saying? I'm too used to my high speed shit, and it was just not that. So yeah. And then when my phone broke, it was just all bad. So, but we back at it. Phone's back. So I'll be, posting some videos and, pictures and shit from, the Jamaica trip and all that stuff. And, we back at it, and we're going to continue to do our thing, you dig? So, yeah, I love you guys. There is no me without you. Enjoy the rest of your night. Happy Halloween to everybody out there, and catch y'all later. Peace.